In this video, we're going to look at adding an LZX Passage to a Vidiot. Passage makes a great addition to a Vidiot. While Passage doesn't generate any new shapes, images, or waveforms of its own, it allows you to do a lot more with the built-in outputs of the Vidiot. This allows you to create more complex shapes and patterns, and can really extend the image creation possibilities within the unit. For this video, I'm going to assume you have a basic working knowledge of both the Vidiot and the Passage. There are getting started videos on this channel if you're not familiar with the basic operations of each. So to begin, let's look at what happens when you just combine the two oscillators from the Vidiot through the Passage. So I'm going to take both sine outputs and go into the in and through inputs on Passage. So we can view just what's happening in the Passage itself. I'm going to go into the camera input on the back of my Vidiot and set this channel to view camera. So now we're seeing just the output from Passage, and as you can see, what we're getting is not dissimilar from what we would see just on our circle mix. So if we switch from there to there, we're getting fairly similar results. That's because Passage is basically replicating what happens inside the Vidiot when we combine the sine outputs of the two oscillators. So now, if I switch this back to circle and take this output and apply it somewhere else in my Vidiot, I can essentially have two independent versions of that circular mix. So I'm going to set this to key to give us another modulation input source. And I'm going to take the output of Passage and put that into the key inversion. So now, as you can see, I've got one circle mix that's being controlled by the built-in control of the Vidiot, and a separate but related mix coming from the Passage. This gives me an extra dimension of complexity when creating patterns. To take this one step further, I can get a second channel of Passage involved. So I'm going to take the output from my first channel, put it into the through input on the second channel of Passage, take the output back to the key inversion, and then in the second input, I'm going to use the hatch output from the Vidiot. And so now, this gives me an additional level of control. One nice thing about the hatch output is that it's not affected by this fader on the Vidiot. So on Passage, these connections are normaled, meaning that whatever's plugged into this channel is going to flow down to the channel below it. So if I take this third output and plug it into one of the color inputs, say the blue channel, this will give me independent control over a color modulation. So in this basic patch setup, I'm taking the two oscillators from the Vidiot, using the internal controls to combine them in one way, and using the Passage to control them in a variety of different ways before hitting various modulation destinations. This opens up a lot of flexibility for generating new shapes. So as I switch through the different modes here, you can start to get a variety of different shapes that are not available within the Vidiot itself. And of course, instead of inverting this, we could use it as a key threshold and get something very different. We can use it as a color channel inverter and get something different there. That's pretty nice. Or we could go into the FM inputs on our oscillator. And continue to adjust all of our individual controls. So I go back here. And of course, we could unsynchronize this oscillator to start to get some animation going. And just generally play around. So Passage is a great way to add new dimensions to your patches within the Vidiot. Of course, getting some audio modulation involved would help make this patch more dynamic, and we'll look at that in the next example. A very typical patch for Passage is to put an LFO into one channel and an oscillator or other image source into the other. When using the Vidiot, this works excellent when using the audio input. So before we get the audio input involved, I'm going to set up a very basic patch using the diamond and the hatch outputs from the Vidiot. I'm putting those into two through channels of the Passage. Eventually we'll get the audio signal in here to modulate them. But for now, let's just look at what the two look like combined. So basically here, I'm just viewing the additive mix of the diamond and the hatch outputs from the Vidiot. I plug the output of the Passage into the camera input on the back. I'm going to switch that over so we can view what we're seeing. I'm now viewing the basic mix of the diamond and the hatch shapes. I'm going to take an audio signal from a synthesizer. So now you see this coming into the ear on your Vidiot. So now I can take that and put it into in1 on my Passage. And again, because of this normal connection, that's going to apply to 1 and to 2. So you can already see it having some effect. And by adjusting the input controls on Passage, I can change how much or how little of an effect that has. And I can change the overall mix of the two. There's no right or wrong way to set these controls, so feel free to experiment till you get something that's dynamic. I really like using the camera input on the back for kind of auditioning what the Passage is doing in this case. And then once I have a pretty good idea of how it's working, I can start to integrate it in other parts of my patch. So I'm going to switch back to my basic circle mix here. And I'll try using this to threshold the key. Turn the keyer on. So already you can see something pretty dynamic is happening. I can adjust different color mixes. I could also put this into my key inversion. Put it into my color inversion. Or any of my individual color channels. I'm going to go back to key inversion for now. And as you play with the different controls on the Passage, you start to get pretty different and dynamic results. So you can go from very, very subtle audio modulation to all-out wildness. One of the things I really like about this particular patch is that the Passage allows you to modulate your oscillators and your mixes in a different way than the Vidiot provides on its own. For example, if I were to take this ear output and put it into some FM controls, we get really nice up or down or left to right movement. But without a Passage, there isn't really a great way to get this kind of symmetrical modulation that moves from the inside out. Of course, there's no reason you can't use the ear output for multiple things in your patch. So put a multiple cable in. And we could also use this, say, to modulate one of the oscillators. And right now we're using the audio to modulate both of our shapes. But we could, of course, take that and say plug a noise in. And we start to get something very different. So that's the basic setup for using an audio input to help mix shapes in the Passage before going back to the Vidiot for further processing. In the next patch, we'll add an external video signal to this whole mix. In this final patch, we're going to get a little bit more involved. In addition to having my audio input coming from a synthesizer, I also have an external video feed playing from an and/or1 media player. In this case, I'm using some light show footage. I'm going to switch my output over to the Luma processor so you can see what's happening. Zero out all my settings to the best of my ability. So now you can see I can adjust the contrast, brightness, all your typical Vidiot stuff. I'm going to turn a keyer on, just for fun. So we have something pretty nice and dynamic happening here. So now to start to get the passage involved, I'm going to take the luma output from the back of my Vidiot. And now this takes the signal from the luma processor section only. I'm also going to take the ear output. This is going to be the signal coming from my external synthesizer. I'm going to put that into the input channel of the passage. So I'm going to switch this back to just noise. We'll take the output. We're going to put that into our key inversion and turn our keyer on. And this should let me start to see what's happening here. So I don't have any signal going into the external audio input, so let me get that started. So now I can use a passage to adjust to make that luma output only really viewable when I have an audio signal. So this signal is interesting enough in its own right. I could use it almost anywhere in my patch to get some different results. Put it in the color channel. But in this case I want to do something kind of wild, and I'm going to use it to modulate one of my oscillators. So now if I switch to an oscillator mix, so what's happening here is my external video feed is frequency modulating my first oscillator, but it's only doing it when the audio is above a certain level. Now the next thing I'm going to do is use the second channel of passage, use that to modulate the key threshold. So now, as you can see, I have independent control over how that keyed image from the luma processor becomes visible in the patch. So in addition to FMing the oscillator, we're also getting a key based on that image. Now because these connections are normaled, I'm still seeing the mix of the audio input and the video input itself. I could break this connection if I wish, by taking something like a hatch output. So now I'm getting the mix of the hatch output and the video feed processed by the luma processor. I can go back and make any adjustments over here that I want, and we'll see them flow through the entire patch. Adjust my thresholds. I can even adjust this to solarize key instead of negative key. And to get some more interesting color information, I'm going to take oscillator 1's output and put that into my color invert switch. This gives me a little bit more of a dynamic palette. And I can start to adjust my different values. And finally, I have one more mix here. So I could take that output and put it into, say, key invert. And if I wanted to, I could take yet another modulation source. So maybe I'll take the second oscillator output, and I can put that into the channel 3 input of my passage. And from here you can just start to play around with your different settings. Everything's very intermodulated in this patch, but everything's fundamentally being driven by our external video input and our external synthesizer audio. By switching through different videos, you'll get very dynamic different effects. So that should give you some idea on how to get started patching the passage with the Vidiot. Although it may seem simple, Passage opens up a lot of patching possibilities not otherwise possible with the Vidiot alone. The ability to mix different modulation sources and oscillators together before inserting them back into other parts of the patch opens up entirely new worlds of possibility. We hope you enjoyed this video, and as always, please leave any questions or ideas for future videos in the comments below. Thanks for watching.